Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to my webinar that I'm hosting this evening. Um, hopefully, this is going to be really useful for those of you that have for those of you that have joined. I will be recording this. Don't worry. Sorry, I will be recording this. I'll then send the link out probably tomorrow for you to be able to watch back again. If you know any fellow runners that haven't been able to make it tonight, but you think this will be useful for them, then obviously by all means do pass on my details, and I can send this link out to them as well. In terms of this evening, this has really just come about as we're getting into sort of the summertime. Some of you may have all sorts of different running events coming up, competitions. Maybe some of you are a sort of first time runner, just slowly getting into it. Equally, some of you may be a little bit more competitive. You may have done quite a lot of marathons, half marathons, 10Ks. Some of you may have just done your first park run, potentially. So this is part of the reason why I set Fuel the Runner up. The idea here is it's just having somewhere that is hopefully providing evidence-informed information to support runners of all levels and abilities with their nutrition to get the most out of their running performance. So just for this evening, I've focused on sort of three ways or three areas where nutrition can certainly help enhance your running performance. So in terms of, first of all, in terms of introduction, so my name's James. I'm a registered performance nutritionist. I have an undergrad in sports science from Brunel University. I went on to complete my master's in sports nutrition at Loughborough, and then I'm on what's called the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register. So this is essentially an accredited program that's part of my role as a performance nutritionist. I'm on it. Just ensures that the information, the service that I provide to athletes is in line. I'm providing, again, evidence-informed information. The trouble with nutrition is it's a very, I suppose, unregulated field. There's a nutritionist is not a protected title. So people like myself, I've studied for 4 years to get where I am. Again, I do a lot of CPD, lots of further development. However, anyone can do a sort of half-day course, costs them about 50 quid, call themselves a nutritionist. But again, some of the information I've heard them talk about is sort of quite dangerous, to be honest. And it's the same with a lot of sports, health and wellbeing. There's so much misinformation there. In terms of my roles, I work across a whole range of sports. So I work with professional golfers in professional football, rugby. I've worked in cricket, and now more recently, as I say, over the past year or so, I've started to support a lot of runners with their nutrition, and as I say, various levels and abilities there. Part of the reason why I set the Fuel the Runner up was just you start to realize just that misinformation of nutrition information there. I suppose my running journey started when I first got a place in the London Marathon, and being on some of these Facebook groups, seeing some of the information that people were posting. It's very clear that nutrition is an area that a lot of not just runners, but a lot of individuals don't always get quite right. And so hopefully this is going to be a really useful webinar this evening. In terms of what I'll cover, just for sort of time purposes, I'm just going to focus on sort of three key areas. The first one, I'll talk about how nutrition can help with fueling your training. As I say, if you've signed up to a competition, if you've got an upcoming event, or maybe you're working towards a training goal, quite often I get the question of when is the best time to start thinking about your nutrition in the build up to the event. And for me, it starts straight away. The moment you sign up to that event, that's the moment to start thinking what you can have or how you can optimize your nutrition, just so you've got the most time to practice your fueling strategy for the race itself. And again, it's not just about the physical performance, it's also allowing the time for things like the gut, the stomach, to train based on the demands of your running too. The second part I'll talk a little bit about is how to get more out of your training in terms of that adaptation. So it's actually the post-training recovery period. That's where we see the biggest improvements in performance. That's really where the muscles, the body starts to develop, adapt to the demands of your training there. And this is a really golden opportunity, often overlooked, I'd say, by a majority of runners, where they finish a long run, they're really tired, they may come in, don't necessarily know what to have or how to structure that recovery process, end up over consuming and not really supporting that recovery process either. The third part I'll talk about is then the impact of nutrition in terms of overall health and well-being. So again, one of the most common, I suppose, one of the most common challenges I see a lot of runners face is that balance between nutrition for supporting running performance, but equally working towards or maintaining health and well-being. So sometimes, for example, if runners are trying to obviously do huge amounts of training, but they're also trying to lose weight at the same time, even quite unintentionally, if you've got a big congested week coming up in terms of training, sometimes there's this mismatch between your energy input and your energy output. So if your energy output is significantly higher than your energy input, there's been in a calorie deficit to support the weight loss. But if that gap or that deficit between the two is too big, this is where it can have further repercussions in terms of health and well-being. So I'll come on to talk about all three of these areas in more detail throughout today. Of course, if you do have any questions for those of you on the webinar now, feel free to post any questions in the chat box. I'll keep all the sort of questions anonymous, so I won't reference any names. Any questions that you have, I'm more than happy to go back to them and answer them at the end. Any questions that you have throughout, again, by all means, do feel free to post in the chat, and I'll come back to those as we finish. So I'll get straight into it. So the first thing I suppose just to highlight is the fact that nutrition, it does make a huge or play a key role in terms of not just running performance, but so many other parts to it too. I often say that nutrition is just 1%. Sorry, I often say nutrition is just 1% of a runner's development, but it's that 1% that can have a huge impact on the other 99%. So most people think about nutrition in terms of what they eat before a run, that's pretty much it. However, actually, there's a number of other parts to this as well. And so you can start to see just how big an impact nutrition has. So impacts race day performance, impacts things like your fueling. So what you're going to get out of your training is very much impacted by the fuel that you put into your body. It can also impact your recovery. Again, I'll come on to talk a little bit more about that later on. Nutrition can have a huge impact in terms of injury prevention, but equally injury rehabilitation. So injuries, they do occur from time to time in many different forms, and actually it's your nutrition that can certainly make a difference in terms of supporting that recovery process. That's the same as part of that. That's the same thing in terms of maintaining a strong immune system. So there's no one food, there's no one product that will boost the immune system, if you like, despite a lot of marketing claims. The best way to optimize a strong immune system is through a varied diet, trying to consume as many different foods and drinks as possible. Again, most people or most runners think about nutrition in terms of the physical demands, but actually nutrition also plays a key role in terms of mindset, focus, concentration. So again, sometimes it's your fueling strategy that can be the difference between you being able to sustain that desired split. It's also your ability to focus, maintain that race strategy throughout the event too. As I say, for time purposes, I'm going to focus on three key areas. So the fueling, optimizing the training adaptation, and then of course, overall health and well-being. So in terms of fueling the training then, when it comes to training, again, I see this quite often where a lot of runners wonder or not, they're not quite sure what they should be consuming, how much they should be consuming, and when they should be food to support that running performance. How much you need, what you need to consume, when you need to consume it will be impacted by so many factors. Again, the duration of your exercise, how hard you're working, maybe the distance that you're traveling, equally the environmental conditions. So where it's been really hot over the past few weeks or so. Again, training in the heat, training in hot environments, it places further demand on the body. So you're actually using more carbohydrate than you're necessarily aware of. So a few things to bear in mind when it comes to pre-run fueling. Carbohydrate. Carbohydrate, it's not your enemy, it is your energy. Carbohydrate is going to provide you with that fuel to support your running performance. So if you are trying to get better, if you've got a set time in mind for that upcoming event, making sure you are fueling yourself sufficiently is going to help improve that performance. So making sure in the build-up to your training, that you are having a good hit of carbohydrate, just helps increase those energy stores ready for the start. And of course, this is where in the build up, starting to choose those higher carbohydrate meals and snacks can certainly help with this. I've got a few examples of what this may look like, just to demonstrate these points in a moment. But in terms of the timing, this is an area that a lot of runners I see get wrong. When it comes to sports nutrition, I often talk about what's called the three T's of nutrition. So the first one is the type. This is the one that most runners are better at, shall we say. So this is the difference in terms of what you're eating and drinking. So are you having a portion of vegetables? Are you having a bag of sweets? Again, when it comes to food choice, it's not so much a case of good food and bad food for runners. It's more this case of context and understanding what's going to be the most appropriate food choice for you in that given situation. The second T is then the total. So this is all to do with your portion sizes, so how much you're having. And again, a lot of runners tend to underconsume, or maybe underconsume the sort of desired nutrients that they need. So most runners tend to underfuel themselves, particularly for those big runs or long runs, big distances that you're doing. The third T is then actually also the timing of your meals. So this is where, in terms of timing, pre-run fueling starts around 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 hours before the run itself. Again, depending on sort of how long you're planning to run for. In terms of your meal and snack choice, again, there's not necessarily a right or wrong with this. A few things to bear in mind though is I try and choose products that are low in things like fat and fiber, particularly as you get closer to the start of the exercise. So the reason for this is consuming lots of high fat, high fibrous foods, it takes the body longer to break these foods or break these meals down. So what you might find is it's a bit like if I said to you, right, eat a huge bowl of porridge, for example, and then run straight away. So I'm literally talking run 10, 15 minutes later. Chances are you might run for a very short period of time before you either get that sensation of feeling like you're going to be sick or needing to go to the toilet. This is otherwise known as runner's gut. Runner's gut is caused by a whole range of factors, which I won't talk about in too much detail this evening. But a common mistake that runners make is that difference in sort of timing, type of food, and actually the amounts that they're having there. So, in terms of what some suitable pre-run meals may look like, again, all of you are very different in terms of maybe when you like to run. So, some of you, if you're like me, you like to run first thing in the morning. Some of you might prefer to run later on in the day. Again, it is entirely up to you. So a few examples just to get you started. If you're training in the morning, things like cereals, things like porridge are always a good a good option. So as you can see, I've got a bowl of porridge with a handful of strawberries. Equally, you could use fruit of your choice. So that could be dried fruit, things like raisins, sultanas, could be a sliced banana. You can mix some honey in there just to give you a little bit more sugar. Equally, if you prefer, things like Weetabix is obviously another option. Equally, things like other cereals you could actually use. So the difference here is, yes, some of those some of those cereals have a higher sugar content, but again, in terms of context, in the build up to exercise, in the build up to training, that's what we want. We want that sort of quick release of sugar into the body to support that running performance. If you're maybe training later on, you could switch to other options, things like jacket potato. So jacket potato, you've got a really good hit of carbohydrate there. Equally, you could add all sorts of toppings to depending on your preference. So you can see I've got things like tuna and sweet corn. Sorry, I've got tuna and sweet corn. You could use things like baked beans on there. Again, it's entirely up to you. So although I'm maybe focusing a little bit more on the carbohydrate for this evening, the other thing to bear in mind is the importance of protein. So you don't have to have huge amounts of protein with all of your meals, but again, having that sort of hit of protein is just going to help keep you fuller and help maintain that sort of hunger and satiety. So rather than when it gets to your sort of pre-run, you start to feel really hungry. So again, something that just gives you a little bit of protein can certainly help. In terms of pasta dishes, again, really simple, quick, easy option here. With pasta dishes, this is a really good example. So going back to my previous point around around sort of choice, I try and choose those in a sort of tomato or vegetable sauce rather than a sort of cheesy or creamy sauce. Just because, again, that sort of cheesy sauce. So this would be the difference between like a pasta carbonara and a chicken arrabbiata. It's going to take a lot longer to break that carbonara down. Whereas the tomato pasta is going to be much easier on the stomach. So things like this can just make a huge difference in terms of reducing that risk of runner's gut. In terms of the amounts that you need, I must admit again for this evening I haven't focused on or I haven't included specific targets just because again that's quite a lot of information to put in quite a short period of time. For me, this is just giving everyone some different ideas that may help them. But again, we can come on, or I may do some further webinars in terms of specific requirements. If you've got a big run coming up, so it's always important to fuel before a run so you get the most out of that training. If you've got a bigger or longer run coming up, so what I mean there is if you're training for anything above an hour, so 2 hours, if you're going to do somewhere between, let's say sort of 10 to 15 miles plus. So this is where, as well as having your sort of having your pre-run meal, having some suitable pre-run snacks can also help. So again, it's just that sort of quick top up of those energy stores ready for the start. So here we want to try and choose those foods, drinks that are going to give us that sort of quick hit of sugar. So that could be things like fruit. So banana is quite a common option for a lot of runners. You could use things like sports drinks, Lucozade Sport. You could even use things like energy gels. Again, sometimes if I'm in a bit of a rush, I haven't had a chance to prepare anything better, I might just grab a gel and have that before I start my run. Again, things like cereal bars. Obviously, there's a huge variety of cereal bars out there. So, again, a really popular one is things like the Rice Krispie Squares. Again, you could make this yourself if you prefer. Equally, using things like bread, so you could have sort of two slices of white toast with, or white bread even with, some strawberry jam. But again, you could swap that for marmalade, swap that for other condiments too. Again, this is by no means a definitive list. It's just a few examples. The one thing I would say as part of that, no matter what you have or what you do, this is where you're training, as well as obviously training, getting the runs done, getting the mileage into your system. This is where it's a really good opportunity to start to practice and trial different nutrition strategies to see what works best for you. Again, part of my role as a performance nutritionist is to translate the theory, the science into practical application. So when it comes to your fueling, some of you may use some of the examples I've mentioned on the previous slide, these ones. Equally, some of you might use something completely different. So if I sort of spent some time one-to-one with all of you on the call now, I'm pretty sure I'd come up with a number of different fueling strategies in terms of what's going to work for you, what's going to help optimize your performance. So, again, some of you may prefer that sort of food approach to fueling. Equally, some people prefer things like carbohydrate drinks. So, as I mentioned, the Lucozade Sports, some of you may prefer to make your own. So, buying things like maltodextrin to make into a sort of carbohydrate drink. Some of you may make your own using things like fruit juices. Again, there's no right or wrong. In terms of during the run itself, so if you're running anything sort of under an hour, providing you've had a suitable pre-run meal, this will give you the energy to sustain that performance throughout. If you're starting to run for anything longer than, again, an hour, hour and a half and beyond, the body only has a certain amount of storage, if you like, in terms of that energy. So carbohydrate is stored as glycogen within the muscle. And in terms of that glycogen store, we've only got enough for around 2 hours worth of high intensity exercise. So if you're going on some of your longer runs, by about halfway, or the first half, your glycogen stores could be depleted by as much as 50%, maybe even a little bit more. And so this is where you may find that your running performance starts to be affected, particularly during the later stages. So this is where a lot of runners during a sort of race quite often describe this idea of hitting the wall, where again, the body's essentially run out of fuel. So again, potentially, as I say, and this will depend on the demands of your training. This is where you may need to consider some pre or sorry, consider some sort of snacks to take with you during the run. Again, every runner's different in terms of what you prefer. I'd say probably the go-to options for a lot of runners is the energy gels and sports drinks. A few points just on energy gels is not all energy gels are the same. You might go into supermarkets, again, a lot more supermarkets will stock various products, mainly science and sport. I've seen a few other brands in there from time to time. You might find that these work for you, but equally, again, we could go to somewhere like Lucasade, for example. So Lucasade do their own energy gels. If anyone on the call is running the London Marathon, this is what will be provided to you on the race itself. But compared to your orange SIS gels, they're a fairly thick consistency, whereas the Lucasade gels, they're incredibly sweet. They're also a much runnier mixture. And even then, although you think, oh yeah, it's an orange energy gel, that can have a huge impact in terms of the stomach's ability to process that. So again, if you are fairly new to running, this is where it becomes a really good opportunity to maybe try different flavors, different brands, different textures to see what works best for you. If you're someone that really doesn't like energy gels, there's equally lots of other ways of doing this. So I've mentioned the sports drinks. The benefits of the sports drinks is you are getting a hit of carbohydrate. It's also supporting your or keeping you hydrated too. And you're also getting the electrolytes, the salts back into your body too. So again, I haven't talked about, or I won't talk about hydration in too much detail this evening. But this is where, again, as well as sweating a lot of fluid, potentially you may be losing quite a lot of these salts that play key roles within the body too. So looking at ways to replenish some of those are really important too. Again, other sort of during run snack options could be things like cereal bars, could be things like sweets. So a cupped hand of jelly beans, jelly babies, quite popular, quite palatable for a lot of runners too. Again, if you prefer, you could use the fruit. So again, some runners like to run and they take a banana with them and then they just sort of break it off a little bit at a time as they get to various sort of mile markers during their runs too. The other thing I'd say with fueling during the run, again, training is a really good option to try this. The other thing I see, or common mistake I see runners make, is when they fuel based on distance. So some people say to me, I take a gel every 5K, let's say. Nothing wrong with that to an extent. However, as you get tired, as you get further into that run, what you might then find is the time or duration it takes you to complete all of those 5K segments starts to get longer. So what it means is you're now under fueling yourself. You're not fueling yourself as often, which can then have further impacts, particularly during the second half. So for me, a better strategy is trying to fuel yourself every 20 minutes, half an hour or so. Just to add,
You understand that the fee that they've offered is £20 million.
just to add to this, quite often a lot of runners, if you're like me, they like to run first thing in the morning. So I thought I'd just add a little bit about early morning running. Early morning runs, particularly if you are going out for a long run, the rules still apply the same thing here. Obviously, however, trying to fuel yourself 3 hours before a 6 a.m. run, you're not going to get up at 3 a.m. to eat. This is not realistic. So this is where we have to think about what are easier strategies. So I've broken this down into essentially two key parts. This is where what you eat the night before particularly becomes or plays a key role. So this is where having a high carbohydrate and a high carb pre-bed snack can certainly help in terms of increasing that glycogen storage within the body. So again, pasta dishes, jacket potatoes, rice dishes, anything like that could be good options here. So when you wake up in the morning, as I say, you can just have something quick, easy, something that's sort of higher in the sugar that's going to give you that rapid release of energy. So if you're going to run at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, for example, you might get up at 5:30. When you wake up, you might just have a gel. Again, it's quick, it's easy, convenient. It could be half a cereal bar, could be half a bottle of sports drink, anything like that, just to give you that sort of fuel to get you through that early morning run. Again, this is by no means a definitive list. It's just a few examples to get you started. But again, as I say, practice what works for you. So when practice what works for you, so that you're going to get the most out of your training. So that's really the first area in which nutrition can make a huge difference. The second part for me is the impact that nutrition can have in terms of enhancing your training adaptation. So, like I say, this is where we get the biggest improvements in terms of performance, pace, speed that you're able to run at. However, most runners tend to overlook this or tend to, I suppose, choose again the wrong options, if you like. So when it comes to optimizing your recovery, this is where some of you may have come across things like the 3 R's of recovery. You may have seen it as the 4 R's. There's various variations of this. I actually use what I call the 5 R's of recovery. So as you can see, the first 3 R's are all to do with nutrition. The fourth R is also about the importance of sleep. Again, sleep in itself is an entire webinar in terms of optimizing, improving your sleep. Again, I won't talk about sleep here in too much detail this evening. But the first three are, like I say, nutrition focused. So the first one, rehydrate. When it comes to your post exercise, so you finish that long run, maybe a big session in the gym, even again, the rules would still apply the same here. Maybe you finish that long run, chances are you will have sweated quite a lot. You would have lost a lot more fluid than you expect. Again, some runners I've worked with before, they've lost as much as a kilo, or I've seen anything from a kilo to about 4 kilos during a sort of long run. And that's a huge amount to lose. Just to put that into perspective, dehydration, anything from about 2% and beyond in terms of body weight. So, again, if you were to lose a kilo, let's say, in your runs, again, this is going to have a huge impact both physically, so the body's having to work harder to meet the demands, but equally psychologically. So, going back to what I said about the concentration. So, the first point is to make sure you are rehydrating, drinking plenty of fluid to replace that you've lost. Again, appreciate post run, you may not want to drink or eat loads of food. So, I've got loads of really simple examples, further tips over the next few slides. The second R is the refuel. So making sure you're then replacing the carbohydrate, the glycogen that you've used in the run too. So again, using a range of different carbohydrate snacks and meals can further support this. The third R is then the rebuild. So this is the importance of protein. So adding protein or having a good hit of protein in your post-recovery meal will certainly support that muscle adaptation. So when we run, when we train, we put lots of stimulus, lots of pressure or stress, if you like, on those muscles, and they start to tear in terms of that structure. And this is where things like plenty of protein in that post recovery strategy can support, as I say, that muscle growth and adaptation. So over time, we start to see this improvement. So, again, improve muscle endurance, improve time to complete some of these events here. The fifth R that you can see at the bottom that I add to this is just about the importance of repeats. So, again, in my experience, a lot of runners may do this once or twice, but actually, where the biggest benefit comes from is where they do this after every training session, after every race, even if it's going to the gym, if you're doing a bit of cross training. Same process here. That's where over time you're going to see the greatest improvement, greatest adaptations. So, in terms of what that post recovery strategy looks like, I've broken this down into sort of three key phases. Phase one is the sort of immediate post training or post competition. So, like I say, you've worked hard. Last thing you want to do is consume huge amounts of food, huge amounts of drinks, but something is better than nothing. Some of you may have heard of this anabolic window, this sort of 30-minute post training, where if we don't eat inside this, we're not going to see any improvements. This has been shown to be incorrect. The body is still in this adaptation mode, if you like, up to around 48 hours post run, post training. So, but at the same time, the sooner we can start this recovery process, the more effective you'll find it. As in, it's going to reduce the time it takes for you to feel less sore, time it takes for you to feel normal again, as some people refer to it. So this is where, as I say, trying to hit or trying to get a good source of protein, that good source of carbohydrate, making sure you're drinking plenty of fluid. Again, Don't start consuming large amounts of volume because that's more likely to make you feel sick. But even just taking a few sips of, again, water, a few sips of sports drink, that's a much better strategy. Phase two is then the sort of 2 to 3 hours post run or post training. So hopefully by this point you're now in a position where you've got, maybe you're back home, you've got access to more food facilities, food storage, cooking options as well. So same process again, trying to choose a sort of post run or more substantial meal with all of those different nutrients. A couple of things that can certainly help is add in things like additional fruit and vegetables. These provide lots of vitamins and minerals, further antioxidants to support that muscle recovery there. And of course, making sure you're drinking plenty of fluid. As I say, I've got some examples on the next slide. Phase three is essentially the sort of day after. So if you're doing, a lot of runners, they'll have their long run day, let's say on a Sunday, and it might be that Monday is their day off. Equally, what you have on the day after a long run or any training session is still going to support your recovery here. So essentially, it's a case of following that same process. Don't necessarily need to have as much in terms of the carbohydrate, but equally regular meals throughout the day, a regular hit of protein, making sure you're drinking plenty of water or plenty of fluid even is still going to support that recovery process. So, in terms of what that looks like, again, this is by no means a definitive list, it's just a few examples. So, for me, a good starting point is the snacks, just because they're easy to put in your kit bag, running bag, so having something sooner rather than later. So, again, cereal bars and fruit are good options. If you've got access to fridges, cooler bags, things like flavoured milk, or equally as part of that, normal milk could be a good option. So, actually, what may come as a surprise is actually the nutritional benefits of milk itself. So if you've got a pint of semi-skimmed milk, you have got that really good hit of protein. So a pint of milk has about 20 or just over 20 grams of protein. It's also got a really good hit of that carbohydrate to support the recovery, and of course, it's going to help rehydrate. And you've also got the addition of things like calcium to support support the strong bones too. Once you're in that position, as I say, once you're home, having that more substantial meal, again, this is where some of those pre-run meals that I mentioned before, we can start to cater some of these to a sort of post-run recovery meals. So for me, my go-to is things like stir fries. I've always got lots of vegetables that need using up. I've usually got things like a pack of chicken that needs to be used too. So dice up some chicken, some vegetables of your choice. Equally, if there's anyone that's maybe vegan or vegetarian, same thing here. You can put them all together, maybe add a source of carbohydrate, again, things like rice, depending on what you've just done. And you've got a really quick, easy meal. So, last thing you want to do after a big training week, big training session, is potentially have to cook a meal that's going to take ages to prepare and then cook. So, little things like this can certainly help here. Again, in terms of hydration, if you don't do this already, I'd certainly encourage you to invest in a water bottle, just so it's something that you can keep in your kit bag or running bag. Again, you can purchase things like electrolyte tablets, electrolyte sachets, pretty cheap. So again, if you go into some of these supermarkets, you'll probably find that there'll be some stocked there. So again, most supermarkets at the moment seem to stock things like SIS. Again, really simple and obviously lots of flavors depending on your preference there. The third area in which I think nutrition plays a really key role, amongst many others, but as I say, I've just focused on sort of what I think are the three most important areas, is actually around athlete or runner health and well-being. So we are, as runners, we are humans first, runners second. And this is where quite often I see through some of my work in sport, some of my work with athletes, some of my work in the general health or general population, is this mismatch between energy intake and energy output. So again, if that distance or that gap between the two is too much, this is where athletes can be more susceptible to this risk of what's called low energy availability, or which can sometimes lead to what's called RED, so relative energy deficiency in sport. And this is basically where, because of that mismatch between fueling and the amount that you're expending, what you might find is actually other parts of the body are compromised too. So basically, your body hasn't got enough energy to live, to function in this optimal way. So what you might find here is you struggling to perform, whether that's during training, during competition. You might find that you're constantly tired. So again, if you haven't got the energy to maintain focus, brain function, you might just constantly feel tired with no sort of real reason, or maybe unexplained. It might be that you're constantly injured. Again, lots of little niggles, lots of little things you can't shake. Same with illness as well. So lots of coughs, colds. So again, nutrition plays a key role in terms of maintaining a strong immune system. And again, if the body hasn't got the fuel it needs to fight off any viruses, infections, this can result in a number of days lost where you could be out running, training. And again, comes back to sort of how you fueled yourself. It can also have a huge impact in terms of other parts of our health and well-being. So for female runners, can impact things like menstrual cycle. For male runners, can impact again things like testosterone, sexual health and well-being, amongst many other things too. So this is where nutrition plays plays a key role in terms of helping not just with running performance but overall health and well-being. And as I say, this is where I think it's a really important area that where runners need to be a little bit more of the role that nutrition can have. Again, I don't want to sort of make this a really long webinar or anything like that, but this is where what you can see on the screen is what's called the Eat Well Guide. The Eat Well Guide is a visual representation of recommendations in the UK in terms of what we should be having, how much we should be having of all these food groups. This is just that these are the guidelines for, I suppose, general health and well-being. Again, for yourselves as runners, the amounts that you require from all these food groups will vary depending on your goals, depending on the demands of your day, your week, other things that you're working towards here. But as I say, this is where a well-balanced diet, consuming all of these food groups. So the green section is your fruit and veg, yellow section is your starchy carbohydrates, the sort of pink section at the bottom is your protein, the blue section is your dairy products, and then again we do still need a little bit of fat in our diet too. Again, maybe this is something I can do as another webinar in a few weeks' time, but this is where, as I say, this is part of the reason why I've set Fuel the Runner up, is to help runners understand what they need in terms of food choice, when they need those specific foods, and how much, so they can get the most out of their running performance. So I am starting to come towards the end of this. Obviously, if you do have any questions, please do post them in the chat box. If you do have any questions and you want to message me separately, I'll put all my contact details on the slide in a moment. One thing I always like to do with any presentation, webinar I give, is summarize some of my top tips. So just for this evening, I've put together my 4 top tips to help you level up your running performance. So the first one is fueling. Fueling is key. Fuel equals performance. If you imagine the body is a bit like your car, so if you try to drive from London to Scotland on half a tank of petrol, you're not going to make it. The performance of the car is affected, is going to be hugely affected. It's the same. It's the same when it comes to the body. So if your body hasn't got the fuel in it that it needs, you're not going to get the most out of it. So making sure you are fueling yourself effectively is really key. In terms of recovery, as I mentioned, this is the area that can have a huge impact in terms of how much you're getting from countless hours out on the pavements, on the treadmills, things like that. Again, using those 4 Rs that I mentioned, and equally adding that fifth R, doing it after every session, that's where you're going to see the biggest impact in terms of your training over the next few weeks. If you do need further help, or if you're looking for further help and advice in terms of nutrition, the biggest recommendation I can say is to reach out to someone that is registered, someone that is qualified. So look for someone that is on what's called the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register. So people like myself, for example. Again, as I say, there's just so much misinformation, particularly on sort of Facebook groups, things like that. I just, even today, I was just seeing loads of different messages coming up and people providing some really poor and even quite frankly dangerous advice. So I do try and sort of provide some insight where possible. But again, as I say, this is part of the reason why I've built why I've built the Fuel the Runner support program to help with this. Although I haven't talked about it in this evening, just the quite a common question I get from a lot of runners is about supplements. What supplements or which supplements would I recommend? Again, for me, I always encourage runners to follow what I call a food first approach. But as part of that, it's more a food first, but not food only. So there are times where supplements can certainly be useful. But again, supplements are really where you're going to see the minimal gains. The maximal gains, or the biggest gains, if you like, are going to come from when you start to understand how to fuel yourself effectively using all these different food groups to support that. So I hope you have enjoyed this webinar. I hope you have found it useful. Like I say, if you have got any fellow runners that you know of, if you're on any Facebook groups that and you know anyone that might find this useful, then I'd love it if you can pass the link on to this. Before I finish, I just wanted to sort of highlight a few things just to make you aware of. So if you are looking to get more out of your running, I've recently launched a few projects to further help with this. So I've recently launched what I call the Fuel the Runner support program. So there's a few options as part of this. The first one is my online platform. So this is a monthly subscription where, as part of your subscription, you get access to my online nutrition course. So there's new modules, new content released each week covering a whole range of topics from around the running, pre-fueling, recovery, race day competitions, staying in a hotel. But then equally, I've also included a lot more about other things outside of running. So navigating takeaways, navigating eating out, for example, amongst many other things. In addition to the course, you have access to my recipe hub, my resource hubs. There's all sorts of resources on there to further help and support your running performance. So there's ebooks, there's Excel spreadsheets that you can download to monitor things like your sweat rate that I mentioned previously. Every month, I host an online webinar. So, a bit like this, I host a webinar where I try and cover topics that runners are, or based on what I'm seeing a lot of questions about. But then equally, if there's anything you want me to cover, then some of the runners reach out and say, could you do a webinar on this topic? And of course, no problem at all. Part of my, I suppose, what I've done with or try to do with this is try and provide a support program that's available to everyone, and I'm very much here to help support. So there's no such thing as a silly question, silly answer. So if you're looking for further support, you have got this as an option. If you have got a competition coming up, or if you're looking for more one-to-one support, I also do have a monthly performance support program. So that's one-to-one with me. We spend a lot more time on Zoom. That's about developing bespoke race day strategies, for example, or support that's more bespoke to you. And as I say, we have regular Zoom calls, email support, WhatsApp. So any questions that you have, obviously reach out. We can then practice some of these fueling strategies during your training too. As part of this, you also get access to my what's called Hexis, which is a sort of nutrition periodization app as well. So again, this will help you with developing your fueling strategy based on the demands of your training. And again, I'm very much here to help you and support you with that. The other thing that you might find useful, this is something that I'm launching next Wednesday, so the 28th of August, is my Fuel the Runner Advanced Coaching Program. So this is something that I ran at the start of this year. Before, it was a 6-week program. I've actually upped it to an 8-week program. So it's an 8-week group support program with me, and I've developed it in a way to provide nutrition education support to runners of all levels and abilities. So as part of this, we'll focus on a key topic each week. So again, predominantly focuses on running performance, but there's lots of other parts that I want to include. So as I said, in terms of maintaining health and well-being, so I'll talk a little bit about navigating the supermarket, food labels, food packaging, equally nutrition for health and well-being too. Again, I'll be sending sort of weekly videos, additional resources, further content, and recipes to help you with this. I also host a weekly Q&A, so I do try and vary it in terms of different days and times to try and cover everyone's availability. I also run it via WhatsApp as well, so you'll get access to my online hub as a sort of separate private network. or private group, and then we'll have a WhatsApp group together where, again, if you've got any questions, bits like that, equally you can sort of share content, support one another too. So that's something that starts next Wednesday. If you're interested, please do drop me an email. So please do drop me an email and I'll put up that information in a moment. Again, it was a really popular program. As I say, I've taken a lot of feedback from it and made a hell of a lot of changes to it. So this is just some feedback that I got from the people that joined it at the start of this year. As you can see, it has been very effective, very popular. So as I say, if you are looking for further help, support, you want to be part of that group network, this might be a good option for yourself. So that is everything from me from this for this webinar for this evening. I hope that has been useful. For those of you on the call, if you do have any questions or comments about anything I've said, then please do reach out. If I have said anything, this video has been recorded, so I will be sending this out probably tomorrow morning. So if you do want to watch this back, as I say, if you want to share this link with any sort of fellow runners, friends, Facebook groups, that'd be very much appreciated. But yeah, any questions? I'll give it sort of a minute or so, just in case. So for those of you on the call, if you want to post in the chat box, if you're happy to unmute yourself, by all means feel free. If you're interested in any of the programs that I mentioned, again, do have a look on my website for joining the Fuel the Runner support, joining the Fuel the Runner platform. If you're interested in the group support program, if you drop me an email, so that's just my email at the bottom. If you're on my social media, my Facebook group or Instagram page, I will actually be posting full details to the group support program on there tomorrow, and equally I'll be emailing more information out about that tomorrow too. Well, I can't see any questions in the chat box, so I'll stop recording.